All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at an absolutely startling historical anomaly in this explainer. We're talking about 16th century Odia texts that seemingly predict specific modern nations, global conflicts, and honestly some incredibly detailed infrastructural logistics. We're not talking about vague, open-to-interpretation prophecies here. We're looking at exact geopolitical alliances that were mapped out centuries before these nations even existed in their current forms. It's like a giant geopolitical puzzle from the past.
According to the Bhavishya Malika, this specific verse from the Padmakalpatika describes a mighty, powerful Russian ruler coming forward to seek the Lord's divine audience. Just pause and think about that for a second. This is a stunning, ancient reference to a modern superpower, written hundreds of years ago. And it frames a relationship based not just on military might, but on a shared spiritual seeking. Totally fascinating, right?
So here is the agenda for today's explainer. We'll start with the 16th century prophecy, move into the multi-front war, discuss Russia as India's protector, break down the 2027 Water Alliance, and finish up with the rise of Akhand Bharat. Okay, Section 1, the 16th century prophecy. Let's look at where this wisdom actually comes from and how it's been preserved for us today. It is absolutely crucial to understand how this knowledge is even reaching us today. The Bhavishya Malika teachings have been meticulously researched, preserved, and propagated, both in India and internationally, by Pundit Dr. Sri Kashinath Mistra and the Biswa Sanatan Dharma Seva Trust. It's really thanks to their dedicated work that these texts are translated and accessible to the rest of the world right now. Now, these ancient scriptures were originally recorded centuries ago by great saints known as the Panchasakas, which includes the highly revered Achyutanandadasa. And what they laid out wasn't just abstract philosophy. They wrote down highly specific geopolitical predictions for the end of the Kali Yuga, which is the age we're said to be transitioning out of right now. Basically, they mapped out a literal timeline of global upheaval. Moving on to Section 2, the multi-front war. So what exactly is the catalyst that brings these massive foreign powers onto Indian soil? Well, the texts actually describe a very specific chain of events. The texts lay out a precise timeline here. As written in the Bhavishya Malika, regional conflicts rapidly escalate into a catastrophic global war. The Malika records that a multi-front war will begin on Indian soil right around the 2025 to 2026 timeframe. On top of that, it describes this immense global upheaval between 2025 and 2028, where modern electronic systems, digital devices, and the internet just fail globally. Can you imagine the unprecedented disruption? It's literally describing a modern technological blackout. And then we get to the alliances, and this is where it gets incredibly specific. The Malakid declares a massive coalition forming against India, a coalition including China, Pakistan, the United States, the UK, and 13 Muslim nations. Pitted against them, the scriptures foretell that India will be supported first and foremost by Russia, and then eventually joined by France, Germany, and Japan. The sheer specificity of these nations, named centuries ago, is exactly what makes investigating this material so fascinating. We're just explaining what the source texts say, and the details are wild.
All right, Section 3, Russia as India's protector. The prophesied role of Russia when India is attacked on multiple fronts goes way, way beyond your standard diplomatic alliance.
In the Kalakanka Gita, the Bhavishya Malika explicitly states that when great calamities befall and tyrants attack, Russia's ruler will come forward. The scripture actually says that India's ruling family will take shelter with Russia for a period of days during the absolute height of this upheaval.
So we aren't just talking about a political alliance from afar, sending aid or whatever. The Malika prophesies a joint India-Russia rule. It says Russian military and administrative governance will physically step in on Indian soil to defend India from its enemies when these multi-front attacks just become too overwhelming. And this Russian support is described as both military and spiritual. On the military side, the Malikas describes Russia defending India from severe missile and nuclear attacks. But here's the really surprising part. The Russian alliance is specifically prophesied to protect the deities of the Jagannath temple in Puri. The texts explain that the deities, Lord Jagannath, Balabhadra, and Subhadra, will actually be relocated for safety to Chadiyatam for a period of 7 days. And the scripture roots this whole event deeply in ancient history, stating that this service fulfills a divine boon granted by Lord Krishna to Russian kings all the way back in the Dwapara Yuga. I mean, that is a deep historical tie.
Which brings us to Section 4, the 2027 Water Alliance. Let's dive into the highly specific logistical and infrastructural predictions tied to this period, because the texts actually pivot from fire and missiles to a totally different element: water.
According to the Bhavishya Malika, water becomes a massive threat during this conflict. The texts specifically foretell the destruction of the human-made Hirakud Dam. Today, that sits in the Sambalpur district of Odisha and is known as the world's longest earthen dam at 26 kilometers. The prophecy states it will be breached via a foreign missile attack, which would cause massive, devastating flooding across 6 entire districts in Odisha.
And these water anomalies aren't just local, they are global. The referenced Malika text explains that polar ice melting and comet impacts will lead to a 75% coastal submersion of the US, the UK, and Atlantic regions. Meanwhile, back in India, ancient lost rivers like the Saraswati are actually prophesied to reappear. To survive all this chaos, the Malika states that the Russian alliance will step in to build vital water infrastructure, literally constructing bridges and massive reservoirs around the year 2027 to protect the populace from famine and floods.
It's honestly fascinating how the ancient texts view this crisis. Right at the exact moment hostile nations fight to dam and divert water as a weapon of war, the Malika prophesies that water will become a divinely protected shelter. For those following the path of Dharma, the water is completely reframed. It shifts from a weapon of destruction into a spiritual refuge that simply cannot be taken away.
Section 5. Rise of Akhand Bharat. So with all this devastating global conflict, environmental catastrophe, and this massive infrastructure alliance, how does it all finally resolve? Let's look at the endgame described in these source texts. The Malika describes the Third World War peaking with a final, decisive 13-month battle situated right in Odisha. This is where the hostile foreign forces are finally completely annihilated. And from the ashes of this immense struggle, the scriptures foretell the emergence of Akhand Bharat, an undivided India, completely victorious and secure. Following this victory, the scriptures state that the geopolitical landscape of the world will be entirely transformed. India will be respected globally as the Vishwa Guru, which means the spiritual guide to the world. This victory is said to usher in the Satya Yuga, bringing an end to the darkness of the Kali Yuga and establishing a brand new global era of peace, truth, and righteous governance under Sanatana Dharma. And as a quick reminder, these profound and incredibly detailed teachings of the Bhavishya Malika aren't just hidden away in some dusty museum. They are being continuously researched, translated into multiple languages, and shared with the world today under the guidance of the Biswa Sanatan Dharma Seva Trust. Their work allows anyone to explore these ancient blueprints for themselves.
Which leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. As the prophesied timeline of 2024 to 2028 approaches, how do we view this intersection of 16th century scripture and modern global hydropolitics? Are these texts offering a literal blueprint of tomorrow's geopolitical reality? And if they are, as the global chessboard shifts exactly as written, are we prepared for the storm they describe? Think about that as you look at the headlines tomorrow.